Justice Rhonda Wood sits in an interesting seat on the Arkansas Supreme Court. She's a lady justice, which happens to be the name of a new podcast she's part of. I asked her about that, how COVID-19 is impacting the court's work, and her thoughts on the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Tell me a little bit about what's been going on in the pandemic here and how the court's been conducting its business before we get to other items.
Sure. Well, the courts, as you know, the judiciary sort of sets its own parameters during COVID. And so the Supreme Court's released various parameters for courts reopening. Right now, most of the hearings are occurring virtually across the state. There are some that are live, mostly criminal cases that are still occurring live, or emergency hearings and some juvenile matters. But for the most part, it is still virtual court. We're using Zoom in Arkansas, as most of I think the legislature and the Department of Education are all sort of using that technology.
Well, let's shift gears. You are part of a podcast called Lady Justice, Women of the Court. I want you to tell me who all is a part of this podcast with you and kind of how it all originated.
So Lady Justice, Women of the Courts podcast consists of Chief Justice Bridget McCormick from Michigan Supreme Court, Justice Eva Guzman from the Texas Supreme Court, and Justice Beth Walker from the West Virginia Supreme Court. And all of us know each other, and we have worked on different projects together, sort of 2 of us here, 3 of us there. But then this summer, when the COVID pandemic hit, I asked the 3 of them to do a joint YouTube interview with my granddaughter to create educational content about the Supreme Court and our roles and what we do at our various courts. And we loved working together. And so from that, we said, let's keep doing projects with the 4 of us. And so then we decided, how could we do it? And podcast ended up being the format we chose.
Well, tell me a little bit about what you guys, what you ladies talk about during your podcast. There's been a couple of them out, I think, since the 1st of September. I've listened to a couple of them, but tell me what you guys primarily discuss.
So we're trying to improve the public education of the judiciary and state Supreme Courts. The first episode, we discussed our various state constitutions that aired on Constitution Day, and compared and contrasted the different ones. We are going to have an episode on Appellate Court 101 for the lay person to understand how appellate courts work. Our second episode that'll come down in October, we talk about our various paths to get to the Supreme Court. We all had various paths and backgrounds, and interestingly, just how we're from different states and our process of election versus appointment to the Supreme Court. And then we just recorded an episode that I think will probably drop today, hopefully, on a mini tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
That one is actually out there already because I have listened to it. So let's talk a little bit about Justice Ginsburg and what she meant to you in terms of her legacy and just her influence in terms of how she impacted women in the legal profession. And you tell a great story in there about something that you learned about her as a working mom.
Absolutely. So I think that all of us, looked up to her coming up in the legal profession, and not just as a Supreme Court justice. We looked up to her as a litigator. And as you know, I taught at Bowen Law School, and that was my history. And so I looked up to her as a law professor, and then becoming a justice as well. And so that was a similar path for me. And yeah, she told a great story about how, the schools always called her instead of her husband when there was an issue with children. And she very politely asked them to start sharing and alternating between the husband and the spouse. The episode on the podcast I talk about is her son apparently stole the elevator, which you'll have to listen on how a child steals an elevator. And that, resonated with me because I had the same experience as a working mom and a lawyer, that I always got the phone calls. And particularly what hit home with me was my husband's a physician, and I never could figure out why they would call me when the child was sick. And back then they would say, well, they're showing the symptoms. Do you think he should stay or go, or she should stay? And I thought, finally, I just said, why are you calling, the lawyer mom instead of the doctor husband? And so that really resonated with me. And so anyway, everyone will have to listen and hear the rest of the story.
All right. We have another female who has been nominated for the Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett there. Tell me a little bit about what you think about her and her candidacy.
So she's brilliant. I think, regardless of how you interpret the Constitution, no one questions her intelligence and her work ethic, and that she's, put in the time and effort. And maybe I'm a little biased because she's, sort of has a similar working mom attitude, and has been through some of the experiences that, again, resonated with me, like I spoke about Justice Ginsburg. So I think that, I tend to think that she would be a fair justice. I think that's part of the purpose of the podcast, is for us to explain that our decisions are not about politics. They're about how we interpret the Constitution and the law. And so I think that hopefully the Senate will listen, and to how she says she would interpret the Constitution. And different, judges have different interpretations, and that's, how we make our selection. And if they're fair, and will give everyone a fair approach, then they should be confirmed.
That's Arkansas Supreme Court Justice Rhonda Woods. You can check out her podcast at ladyjustice.podbean.com or wherever you get your podcast. That is all for this week's edition of Talk Business and Politics. I'm Roby Brock. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.